Welcome to Seek Travel Ride. This is the podcast where we share the stories of people who have embarked on epic adventures by bike. From touring cyclists exploring the world to bikepackers tackling remote trails, each episode is packed with inspiration and tips to fuel your own cycling dreams. I'm super thrilled to announce a major milestone. Episode 100 is just around the corner. To celebrate, we've teamed up with our amazing show sponsor, Old Man Mountain, to bring you an exciting giveaway. Old Man Mountain racks are the ultimate gear solution for adventurers, designed to perform wherever your bike takes you. Whether you're on gravel trails or the open road, their commitment to quality makes them the perfect partner for Seek Travel Ride. And to celebrate our 100th episode milestone, they have donated an amazing prize consisting of 2 racks, 2 sets of panniers, a trunk bag and an Old Man Mountain fit kit. They will fit whichever bike you choose to take on your own adventure, and the giveaway is happening over at our Instagram. Make sure to check us out at Seek Travel Ride. You can find out all the details on how you can enter for your chance to win that amazing prize pack. Now let's get into the show and stoke your wanderlust for bike adventures.
I had this sleepless night in Bangkok, and I was reflecting on my journey. And I thought, how could this incredible, life-changing journey come to such an end? And I just thought to myself, you know what? You are the writer of your own story. And if you don't like this ending of this story, rewrite it. In this moment, I changed my perspective because it always felt like, oh, I got hit by all of these misfortunes. I got hit by the motorbike. I got bitten by a mosquito, got chikungunya. I just got one hit after the other, and I felt like I had nothing left to give. But then I thought, change your perspective here. What if this is not trying to stop you, but to see how hard you really want this?
Welcome to the Seek Travel Ride podcast, where we share the stories and experiences of people who have undertaken amazing adventures by bike. Whether it's crossing state borders, mountain ranges, countries or continents, we want to share that spirit of adventuring on 2 wheels with our listeners. Hello, I'm your host Bella Malloy, and I'm very excited to introduce my guest for today's episode of Seek Travel Ride, Madeline Hoffmann. Listeners, this episode is extra special to me as Madeline was actually the very first guest I recorded an interview with when I started the podcast. So when I saw that I would soon be conducting interview number 100, I knew who I wanted to speak to. I reached out to Madeline and asked her on the show again, and I'm so glad to say she has said yes. Now, for that very first interview, it was January 2023, and Madeline had just arrived in Kayseri, Turkey. She'd cycled there from Germany to meet her father for the very first time. She'd undertaken that journey across Europe without any prior bikepacking experience, just the curiosity to travel under her own steam and explore the world. Her motto on that ride was infamously, "No plan is my plan." So it was super interesting for me to see where her adventures would take her once she'd arrived at that end point. Now, what Madeline did after that is no short of incredible to me. She decided the only logical way for her to get back to her home in Sydney, Australia, was to ride her bike there, continuing her tour and physically riding to the other side of the world. But her route wasn't the typical one you'd see many overlanders take from Europe to Asia. Instead, Madeline embraced adventure full on and headed through the Middle East, cycling across the oppressively hot desert sands of the Sahara, travelling through Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. Then she continued her journey in Pakistan and India. But sometimes things happen on a bike tour that stop you in your tracks, and for Madeline, that was contracting chikungunya, a mosquito-borne virus which wreaked havoc with her body. But rather than call it quits, Madeline took time out to recover and then made her way through Southeast Asia before eventually flying back to Brisbane, Australia to cycle the rest of the way to Sydney. Needless to say, I'm ridiculously excited to speak with Madeline today, to have her recall her amazing experiences from this incredible journey and to find out exactly what was it like to see the world from a bicycle on a 15-month adventure spanning 23 countries. Madeline Hoffmann, the biggest, warmest welcome back to the show.
Hi, Bella. Thank you so much for thinking of me for your 100th episode. It's such an honor to be here and talk to you again.
Madeline, I am absolutely buzzing for this episode. Just thinking about what I'd even write for your introduction took me all the way back to what journey you have undertaken since we first spoke. You're going to have some ridiculously amazing stories and experiences to share. But before we get into that, the question that I'm going to ask you to start off this episode is, Madeline, do you remember the very first day on your bike tour?
I do remember that very first day, and I think I will never forget that very first day because starting a journey like this is just such a learning by doing experience. And it all started with me flying across the globe from Sydney to Frankfurt and putting my bike back together at the airport and literally riding my bike out of Frankfurt airport after, I think, 23 hours of flying, and then exploring Frankfurt out of the eyes of a tourist. At that time, I was back in Germany after 4 years, as COVID didn't allow me to go back earlier. So it was a very emotional, yeah, situation for me. And just being on my bike, riding out of an airport is such a special and unique thing to do. And I remember I rode 30 kilometers, and during this 30-kilometer, I already met a very kind local, and he started chatting to me and showed me my first campsite. And I did not go to a hotel on my very first day after I flew around the globe. I straight away jumped into the adventure and wild camped.
Oh my goodness, there's so many things that you've said there that I'd love to dive into. The idea that bike touring, bike packing, adventuring on two wheels, whatever we want to call it, listeners, is learning by doing. I think that's so, so true. And I think often we can get caught up in the, oh, I don't know enough to even give things a go. But you're a prime example of someone who never toured before, and yet this was your first tour. You must look back at a world map and go, wow, did I cycle there?
Indeed, there is actually a German saying that says, you grow with your tasks. And I think that is very fitting for me. Whatever kind of comes my way, I can take on. But I'm not a person who plans and really thinks ahead. But whatever you throw at me, I will deal with it.
Have you found then, Madeline, that you have got the self certainty within yourself to know that you can handle whatever comes your way, that you will find a way, there are solutions?
I mean, I definitely have it deep inside of me. Of course, I'm also a person of anxieties and insecurities. So you can forget that on a day-to-day basis, but you always have to come back to yourself and always remind yourself too that you have everything in yourself, that you just need to believe in yourself and, yeah, bring out the best in you.
And then going back to that day, like even the idea, putting your bike together at the airport, there's that anxiety of, oh my gosh, has it come intact? There's nothing broken? Do I remember have I tightened everything up tightly enough? And rolling out and getting on your way to the beautiful serendipitous moment of meeting someone who's shown you a perfect place to wild camp for your first night. Had you initially planned to wild camp that night?
I did plan to wild camp that night, but initially I was hoping to cycle further. However, when I was meeting this local and we cycled a little bit together, and then he said, well, I'm turning right here. If you want, you can come with me. It will be a detour for you. And I thought to myself, I could either stick to the route I had thought about, or I can go with the flow and go with this local who wants to show me a beautiful, stunning nature spot. And when I got to this place, I actually realized this is where I want to camp. So it was my spontaneous yeah, listening to my spontaneous voice, who in the end showed me that camp spot.
I spoke with you when you were literally, I think, 2 days, maybe 3 days after you'd arrived in Kayseri with your father there. The first meeting of your father as well. It's not like you had ever grown up with him, even as a young child, and then, it was so early in your life you'd forgotten those memories. You'd never met the man before. It really struck me at the time just what an emotional moment and experience to be going through. You ended up spending a number of weeks there, then learning about your family, your father, I guess your grandmother as well. What was that like?
Yeah, I arrived at my father's place in January, I believe. And I wasn't initially planning to actually stay with my father, but everything just took its turns when I arrived there. My father and me actually resemble each other a lot.
Definitely.
People would say we don't need a DNA test. That's how similar we looked. Yeah, when I arrived, he lived with his mother, so my grandma, my baba anne, you would call it in Turkish. And so I got to know her for the first time as well as him, just 4 levels below us. His 2 sisters were living, so my aunts, and I had cousins. And yeah, it was a really heartwarming welcome. They greeted me warmly with open arms. I stayed with my father for around 7 weeks, so I got to know the family very well. And my father cooked for me every day, and I got to know the Turkish culture. Yeah, it was a beautiful experience.
Because I imagine leading up to that moment, I couldn't have imagined what thoughts would have been going through your mind, like leading up to that day of the meeting him for the first time? Because this is something that you had been building to since I think it was 7 years prior that you had found out who he was.
Exactly. 7 years prior to that, I actually had found out that I'm half Turkish. Until that day, I thought I'm 100% German. I had no idea that I have a Turkish father. I had no idea of his name. Yeah, then finally finding the inner strength to go and explore my second culture, to go and meet him was very important for me, I think, to know more about myself, find out, yeah, about my second culture and see what aspects of it I have in myself. And I think I found quite a lot. The culture of Turkey resonated with me, and I could feel it was in my blood.
Hey there, listeners. Are you tuning in and getting some inspiration for your own bike adventures? Well, here's a shout out to Old Man Mountain who are supporting the podcast. Whether you're preparing for a weekend bikepacking trip or looking to embark on a longer distance bike tour across continents, to everything in between, Old Man Mountain has a rack solution to fit your bike and suit your adventure. On their website, you will find their handy fit calculator, which will help you choose the ideal rack for your bike. Head over to oldmanmountain.com and get ready to hit the road fully equipped. Okay, back to the episode. You mentioned that you spent, in the end, 7 weeks with your father. Am I right? There was the major earthquake that occurred in Turkey happened in the middle of that time frame, because if I'm remembering correctly, you were going to set off earlier than what you had. And I think the earthquake happened and then you were sort of, I don't know what the right word to even phrase it would be, Madeline, but you were shocked to your core. You sort of felt like you needed to help somehow, but still you felt helpless. You also didn't know where to travel to. Do you remember that unsettling feeling?
Yeah, that's correct. So it was that at the time I had been at my father's place for about 5 weeks and I felt ready to leave. I felt ready to take my life into my own hands again. I wanted my independency back. I guess everybody who spends some time with their parents can understand it's nice, but then, you know, and it was obviously a stranger man first to me. So yeah, I was ready to carry on with my journey. But then suddenly it was snowing very intensely. We were knee deep in snow, and the temperature dropped to minus 20 degree.
Whoa.
And I remember I felt really restless, and I was walking the streets with my father, very frustrated because I already wanted to be at that time in Gaziantep. That's where my route was leading next to. So I wanted to go through the mountain villages, then to Gaziantep, and then along the border to Iraq. Yeah, so I was getting really frustrated. And I remember that I was walking down the street with my father, very frustrated, very unhappy. And suddenly, a lesson that I had learned on my journey came to me, and that was that I have to trust the universe. I have to trust that there's a reason why I am still here in Kayseri and not yet in Gaziantep. And that thought calmed me, and I suddenly felt optimistic. And I was like, yes, there's a reason why I'm here in this exact moment. And I was writing my blog before I went to sleep. And I literally called that blog entry Trust the Universe. And then I shut my eyes. And the next time I woke up, I looked around the room and the room was spinning. And I had no idea what happened until I realized it was an earthquake, as I had never been in an earthquake before.
I didn't realize that you were close enough to even feel the earthquake. I mean, it was a massive earthquake, and I cannot even imagine the devastation that, well, I mean, I've seen pictures of it, but I couldn't imagine what it would have been like to have been in the epicenter. But you actually felt it there in the home in Kayseri as well.
Oh, yes, yes. It was actually very strong where we were. We were also on the ninth floor. I remember that I ran into the living room and I literally saw my father sitting in the door frame, filming the chandelier, moving from one side to the other. And I just looked at him and I was like, really? But I just thought to myself, okay, this is not the right moment to pick a fight.
Yeah, it's not what reaction I would have.
No, I mean, I would probably wake up my family members and try to get us to safety. So my father was sitting in the doorframe, and then I remember that I went to my phone and I Googled Kayseri earthquake, and it came up with epicenter in Gaziantep. And I just looked at my screen in disbelief, and I had goosebumps all over my body because Gaziantep was the place I wanted to be. And the more I studied the map, when the reports came in, how devastating this earthquake really was, I saw that actually all the villages that I would have cycled through as soon as I left Kayseri were destroyed by the earthquake. So I was just really lucky. And that thought that I had the moment before, that I had to trust the universe, literally that strong snowfall might have saved me, you know?
I am literally covered in goosebumps head to toe, my arms, just hearing that. And yeah, oh, wow. Because there was another bike tourer that you had met in Turkey, and he was around there, wasn't he?
Correct. I was in touch with Marco, an Italian bike tourer. We met a few times throughout my journey, and I was aware that he was in Gaziantep. I was in touch with him throughout the time. And then when things got really bad, I said, try to get a bus and come to us. So Marco then spent 1 week with my father and me.
Couldn't imagine what it would have been like for Marco actually being in Gaziantep at the time, but also that comfort of being like with you, your father, and a family somewhere safe to sort of try and process what's going on. Because at that point, I want to know, if I rewind before the earthquake, you know how you said you were meant to leave earlier, you'd been there 5 weeks, you needed to get away.
Yeah.
Had you made the decision before arriving at your father's place that the way you were going to leave was on your bicycle? Like, From what I understand, Madeline, you took the decision to cycle from your home birthplace in Germany to your father's house. That was going to be your tour, which is a huge trip in itself.
Correct.
To see what you've done since is monumental. But when did you decide that you were going to leave Turkey on the bike?
So, yes, my tour was only meant to be 6 months. That's how long I had subleased my flat in Sydney. I bought 6 months worth of cat food for my cat. Yeah, and then the plan was to cycle from Germany to Turkey. But when I started touring, I was such a novice to touring. But early on, I fell so in love with this way of traveling that I thought, wow, I'm not sure if I can stop in Turkey. And in some ways, I thought it might only get more interesting after Turkey. The more south I went from Germany on, the better the hospitality of the people became. And really, the more interesting the culture got as well.
I've heard that from other travelers as well, like traveling to cultures which seem more foreign than the one that you know yourself, that you've been brought up with. They give you the deepest insights, but also it's that cliche also, traveling to places where people have the least, they seem to actually have the most for you as well.
That's true. I literally wrote that in my notes this morning.
I'm sure that you were blown away by hospitality right throughout the trip. I feel these are impossible questions, Madeline, but if you were to share a moment of hospitality from a stranger that blew you away from somewhere on your trip, what would you tell me about?
Oh, I mean, there are so many moments. I think everything just blew me away. I'm not sure if I could find the most incredible moment right now, but um, I mean, once in Saudi Arabia, I was just really exhausted and I was just resting in a cafe and it was scorching hot outside. And this man come over and he chatted to me and he said he suddenly came back and he said he had booked me a hotel. And I looked at him in disbelief. And then I realized he had booked me a hotel for a couple of hours. But when he realized how tired and dirty and sweaty I was, he just booked me the hotel for the whole night. And I just couldn't believe it. I had almost no time to thank him. That's how quickly he disappeared.
Wow. And one small act of unexpected kindness makes such a difference to you, totally
Yeah.
not expected from a complete stranger.
Yeah. Like I don't even know his name.
Can I ask, you know how you're back in Sydney now? I think you're a warm showers host, actually, aren't you?
I am.
So what's it been like to actually return the favour to a bike traveller and actually host someone?
It's been very interesting. So my couch surfing profile so far was a bit more successful as the warm showers. I guess there are not that many bike tours in Australia who need accommodation in Sydney. But I actually did have the chance to host my friend Nabil, which I had met cycling in India. And yeah, Nabil was cycling from Darwin down to Adelaide and then to Sydney. So I finally had the chance to return the favor, and it makes me immensely happy. And when guests are here, I hosted a few other people, not that many because I also have a flatmate and, of course, need to, yeah, accept the privacy and the space of my flatmate. But whenever I had people here, I try to make them feel as comfortable as possible. So, for example, I would offer them my bed, what so many people did to me on my journey. And I don't feel like I have to do this, but because I know how nice this feeling can be, and just that you don't have a bed so often throughout your journey. For me, it is just one day, but for them, it means a lot. Yeah, it makes me really happy to be able to give back, be part of other people's story.
Yeah, and it's through that understanding of a lived in experience as well. You know what it feels like, and to be able to give that gift to someone else. It's that paying it forward, literally, isn't it?
Exactly.
What about then, Madeline? Okay, you knew obviously you needed to continue this life somehow. And I'm assuming for everyone listening at home, your cat Maestro is still around, so you obviously found some more people to sublet your flat to and keep your cat alive, right?
Correct. I was organizing this all while I was at my father's place in Turkey. So I just had like interviews via video calls for people who would take care of my cat and my place while I'm away. And yeah, a few things had to be sorted out, but luckily I was able to manage all of these things from afar.
Wow. So you do all of that life admin, as I would call it, get all the ducks in a row, the way is forward for you to keep exploring on your bike. No plan is your plan. I appreciate that. But how did you come up with the route that you ended up taking? And I don't mean day by day route by any measure. I mean, how did you determine which way you were going to actually make your way across back to Australia?
Hey, awesome listeners. Are you loving what you're hearing on Seek Travel Ride? Do you want to keep the good vibes rolling? Then head over to our Buy Me a Coffee page and show your support for the podcast. Just a little virtual caffeine love can keep me brewing up the content which you adore. Click the link in the show notes, buy me a virtual coffee, and let's keep this podcast party going. Thanks, legends. Now back to the episode.
Yeah, once again, nothing was really set in stone. However, of course, I had to start somewhere. And my original plan was, like I mentioned before, go direction Gaziantep and Mardin? Mardin, and via Mardin to Iraq and then across to Iran. However, obviously the terrible earthquake happened. The future of my journey was uncertain. Like you mentioned before, I felt super helpless and yeah, I thought, what is the point anyway? But I also realized that death is kind of our constant companion and that it doesn't make any sense if I stop living my life due to this terrible, terrible earthquake. So I had to decide to continue. But the way through to Gaziantep was destroyed, and I also didn't want to cycle through that destroyed region. And there were some, due to the political unrest in Iran, it felt quite unsafe, especially as a solo female traveler. I still wanted to push for it, but I also didn't want to interfere with the protest and with the fights the women in Iran were fighting for. And in the end, I threw a coin.
Oh, wow. I love this. This is so Madeline Hoffmann.
I have to tell you, I did this a few times throughout my journey, and sometimes I overruled the coin.
Oh, okay. I want to know, okay, did you overrule on this time? And what was the coin toss? What were your options?
So, as I was in contact with Marco, he was in the same situation as he also wanted to continue his journey. So we were weighing up options. What could be possible? Originally, Iran was the plan. But then was, what is the other option? And the other option seemed to be the Middle East. So I threw a coin that decided either Middle East or Iran. And the coin decided for Middle East. And what did I do? I applied for the Iranian visa.
Oh, wow. So you were overruling the coin at that point anyway.
I was once again. However, while I was filling in this application, I had such high anxiety. I just felt like something is going to go completely wrong. And in the end, I didn't get the visa. So decisions were out of my control.
The universe is telling you which way to go once again,
Exactly.
right?
Sometimes when something is too hard, you have to let it go and go the path that opens up to you. And with that, I went to the Middle East.
It's amazing to hear that. And your struggles with going to Iran or not, I totally understand. I've learnt so much about Iran. I know Iranian people through my guests are the most hospitable people probably most anyone has encountered. It's a really hard decision and I can understand why you wrestled with it.
Yeah, correct. I I was so curious about Iran, and I have no doubts that these people are one of the most hospitable people in the world, and the culture is so rich. And this is why exactly I was so hoping to go to Iran, and one day I'm hopefully
Mm.
lucky enough to go there. But yes, no doubt that the government is the major problem here.
From Turkey, where was your landing point then? Where did you leave Turkey and where did you enter into?
So in the end, I unfortunately had to interrupt the cycling with taking a plane, as there are no boats to the Middle East currently. So I had to fly from Antalya to Tel Aviv. And then I spent like a week in Tel Aviv, kind of just relaxing and trying to get over this very, very personal experience I just had with staying with my father for 7 weeks and the earthquake and everything.
It's an emotional state of mind. You're going through some huge things. If I was to put my corporate work hat on, you're processing a lot, you know? And it's pretty intense, the stuff that you're thinking about, human grief on a catastrophic scale with an earthquake, learning about this other side of your family that you had never known about for the first time as well. Hi, listeners. This is Bella here, just with a trigger warning. The following segment includes a discussion about an attempted sexual assault. This part of the episode may be distressing to some listeners, and if you'd like to skip this conversation, please fast forward approximately 10 minutes or skip to the chapter entitled Cycling Through Saudi Arabia. If you or someone you know is affected by sexual violence, please consider reaching out to a trusted local organisation or support line. And for global resources, I recommend starting with the UN Women Helpline Directory, which lists services in various countries. You find yourself in Tel Aviv, and then in that fragile state, you actually had an incident there which could have been a reason to just can your trip as well.
Correct, yeah. So after a week I had spent in Tel Aviv, I started cycling again. And before I started cycling, I had this great anxiety in me. I just had this feeling something bad is going to happen. And one of the locals I had met in Tel Aviv had shared this map of free campsites all spread out in the country. And I think that might have given me a false feeling of safety. So I cycled for about 50 kilometers and then I called it a day. And I was so happy to just have made it to one of the beach that was marked as one of these free campsites. And while I was arriving there, the sun was setting. It was a beautiful scenery. I just remember standing in the dunes and sending my bike touring companion I was in touch with a voice message, so Marco, and I was just speaking about how happy I am that I've made it to this place around sunset. And while I was sending this voice message, I looked to the side and I could see a guy in a hoodie. He was literally just taking a pee in a corner, but I felt like he was looking at me strangely. And I often think back to that moment. In hindsight, I felt like I was ignoring some warning signs there, but I think I was so euphoric about making it there at sunset. And like I said, this false feeling of safety due to being it an actual marked free campsite. So I already assumed there would be other people there, and they were. Usually, I would make sure that nobody sees my tent before darkness. So then I set up my tent and I watched the sun setting at the beach and went to sleep. The interesting thing was that I had set up my tent on a slope, so I turned around in the tent without turning my tent around.
Oh yeah, that lovely thing where your head end up at your feet and you're disoriented. Everyone who's ever not camped on level ground knows what you're talking about.
Exactly. But this also kind of played a pivotal role in what happened after. So I woke up in the middle of the night and I felt like there was some weight on my legs and it was pitch black. And I just remember being very confused. And like I said, it was pitch black. I couldn't see anything. So I sat up and my legs were really close to the fly net. So I started to feel the fly net and I felt like it was moving. Like I felt something that was moving. And I was like, oh, is it a dingo maybe? Are there dingoes in this country? And I was really confused. However, as I kept on feeling the fly net, I soon had something else in my hand that gave me a hint to what I was holding. It was hard and pointy. And that was just the moment I realized what was going on. And I was really scared. I could feel how I was like caught in this tunnel where you either freeze or you run. And I felt I was frozen. I was so scared. I think it's the worst case you think might happen, that there's someone who tries to intrude into your tent. And in that moment, I was lucky because in the end, in this split second, I was able to find my inner strength. I felt like I was, like I said, almost going down this path of being frozen and not being able to react and not being able to move anymore. But I felt like I was turning around 180 degrees. I found the strength in myself. And I made the most animalistic sound with the deepest voice I had in me, because I still wanted that guy to think that there might be a man in the tent. He also actually said something at a certain stage. I cannot tell you what language it was. I only know I did not understand it. And then after I did that, I started to bash the tent with my fists as hard as I could. And I just screamed as loud as I could over and over again. And it was echoing on the entire beach. And after I had fought him off, I was like left in darkness. And it was 1 p.m. I was going through my bags in panic, trying to find my pepper spray, not knowing if he left, if he is still there, not knowing what to do. Should I leave the tent? Should I stay inside? Like I said, it was 1 a.m. and I had an entire night still ahead of me. So I just sat there for hours, clinging on to my pepper spray until almost sunrise. And then I actually fell asleep. And I had a very vivid dream of what had happened. And I relived it again, just that this time I wasn't waking up.
Oh, horrible.
The next day I was incredibly shaken. My tent had become my home throughout the journey, so it was very difficult to go on after what had happened. Like, your trust is kind of completely destroyed. And it is quite interesting because some people very easily brush it off and say, but you're fine. Nothing has happened to you, right? Nothing physically had happened to me. However, the PTSD I suffered after that was incredible. I had so much anxiety. I would bash the tent and yell out, imagining that someone is literally there without anybody being there. I was in the desert by myself, and my PTSD was so strong. So
I just say, first and foremost, I'm so sorry that you had to go through that. It's just horrendous. I'm lost for words at how I would react in that situation. And the idea that something physically, thankfully, did not occur means that everything's fine. Someone's violated your space with really horrible, horrible intentions. Thankfully, that situation didn't unfold, but my goodness, the repercussions it would have had. I often looked at your journey, Madeline, through countries and the places you were going, and I often thought, wow, to continue on with your journey in the first place. Did you actually at that point ever consider not going on? Because something that's shaken you up so much, I couldn't actually imagine what it was like for you to make the decision to go on there. Your sanctuary of safety, your home, your tent no longer felt like a safe place.
Well, I think there's always the initial reaction, which is like, this is it, go home. Because, like I said, this situation had shaken me up a lot. I had incredible difficulties afterwards while camping. And if I wouldn't sleep at night, I wouldn't be able really to cycle. Like, it was just getting really, really intense to cycle during the day without having had a good night's sleep. And this was going on for a while. This immense anxiety, I could literally feel how it was bad for my heart. I had such heavy anxiety that I felt my heart was impacted. But I think conversations with friends after and discussing this situation and also reminding myself to how many positive experiences I actually had on the journey. And also giving this man no power over myself kept me going. It was very difficult for me to fight myself back. I eventually had to take the decision to, first of all, not wild camp anymore because of that strong PTSD. So I mainly slept at hosts' houses, and I carried on like that for weeks until Saudi Arabia, literally.
Can I ask, what gave you the decision to actually go to Saudi?
I mean, I guess I made the decision to go to the Middle East. So Saudi Arabia was part of the package, I guess.
Were you anxious about that at the time? Like, was that part of the, when you were saying, when this is going way back now, tossing up Iran, Middle East, was Saudi a country that gave you any anxiety at the time or no?
No, I never thought that far ahead, first of all.
Of course. No plan is your plan. I love it.
And second, I did hardly know anything about Saudi Arabia, and I guess the things I knew weren't too positive, to be honest. But I'm always keen to make my own opinion about countries and governments. You cannot compare governments to people, right?
Mm.
So even if the government is horrible, it might have the loveliest people in the country.
What was your prep like for someone traveling through remote, isolated landscapes in oppressive heat, like for someone who cycles with no plan? Because you have to plan to some degree when you're going to be in that type of hostile environment, right?
Yes.
And when I say hostile, I'm talking about the weather extremes here.
Yeah, of course, I had to get better and better in planning a little bit ahead in these kind of environments. I think the first thing I did was in Amman, in Jordan. I bought myself what some people would call a military suit. But for me, that was more for the sun protection because I'm quite fair skinned, get easily sunburned. And so I wanted to protect my skin, and I also wanted to cover up out of respect for the Muslim religion and for my own safety. I didn't want to attract any unwanted attention. So I bought myself this suit. So sun protection played a big role for me. I had a hat already. And I guess then water and food are your main worries, because in a country like Saudi Arabia, you really don't have to worry much about wild camping sites because it's a huge and vast country, and there will be lots and lots of opportunities to camp.
I think the other thing is you're guaranteed that you're going to have sand in your tent for weeks, right?
Well, the funny thing is there's lots and lots of desert in Saudi Arabia, but there's, of course, lots of different types of deserts. So when people think the landscape might be really mundane and always the same, it was actually quite different. There was lots of variety. Sometimes it was more of a rocky desert, sometimes a really sandy desert, sometimes kind of a black desert. Yeah, so you kind of had everything, and I don't even know if I had that much scent in my tent, to be honest. But I mean, I'm sure there was quite a bit.
It was just all part of the experience, full stop. Actually, something I learnt while you were in Saudi was through the day, there was a real pattern. You'd start off with a hot day, and then there was a pattern in that you'd make your way to, I don't know, was it like a service station or something? And then it would be like your typical Saudi hospitality, which was like tea or coffee in a room on beautiful sort of Persian type carpet rugs or something like that. And the hospitality would sort of get you through the middle of the day, and then you'd find a place and you'd have like a video of, well, this is me and all my friends, and it was just you out there in the wild, in the desert. When I say that back to you, does that take you there?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think my days in Saudi were literally cycling from one petrol station to the other because there was nothing else around. I mean, I did not only experience incredible hospitality on these petrol stations, but in Saudi, it's more like, hey, there's a car driving past, it pulls over, it gives you a bottle of water and a pack of dates. Then, after a few minutes, another car stops, gives you some bananas, and hey, by the way, do you want some tea? And they get out their little glass and their thermos and pour you a tea in the middle of the desert.
Wow.
Or you cycle past a guy with a massive hookah sitting next to the oasis, and he invites you over to sit with him and his family. And then you have like sweets and Saudi coffee with them. And after a little while, you carry on. So I quickly learned to not carry around too much water in Saudi because the locals would always look out for you. The only interesting thing is the closer you get to Mecca, the less people will look out for you.
Why is that?
I think it's because the more touristy a place is, the less people look out for each other.
Yeah, that's right. All the way around the world, right?
Exactly. So I think I really cycled through parts of Saudi that have almost never seen foreigners because I took a border most foreigners don't take. So people were really surprised to see me and very confused. And yes, due to my so called army suit, a lot of people actually could not tell if I'm a woman or a man. And I fully indulged in that. Sometimes I did not tell them or correct them because it's like, why does it matter?
And I guess it's you reclaiming yourself, taking away a bit of that vulnerability, that perception of vulnerability as well, right?
Exactly. I mean, yeah, some people are very curious. So they're like, take your head off. And I'm like, no, no, I'm not taking my head off. So Saudi was very interesting. But like you said, often my day would start really, really early. The hotter Saudi got, the earlier I got up. I think I remember once setting my alarm at 3:45. Yeah, so I got up in the desert. The stars were high above my head, and I started drinking cardamom coffee.
I was going to ask, when you were mentioning about people giving you Saudi coffee, I was going to ask, how does it compare to Turkish coffee?
Turkish coffee and Saudi coffee are very different. While Turkish coffee usually doesn't have any spices in it, and it's just like brewed in that little thing on the stove. So it's very dark, quite strong. And meanwhile, Saudi coffee, I think they brew for about 20 minutes. It has kind of a light yellow brownish color. And they put things like it like cardamom and cloves. And it is just a very, I wouldn't even, so if you, for example, as a Western person and you want a proper coffee, I don't think a Saudi coffee is what you want. But what I really liked about Saudi coffee is that it doesn't have as much caffeine as a regular coffee. So for me, it was more like a pleasure drink in the afternoon. It wasn't really to wake me up or anything like this, but I really Saudi coffee really grew on me, and I'm actually missing it a lot.
I was going to say, is there any way that you would know, like, would you be tempted to try and learn how to brew it there in Sydney, like at your home? Like,
Yeah, I think I have to go to the western suburbs to see if find some Arabic ground coffee because, like I said, I think the coffee is quite different they're using. But if I find that, I might be able to, yeah, recreate it. But usually I do have my coffee with cardamom, and this is actually the way you drink it in Jordan. So in Jordan, I was a bit in paradise because they were just selling the way I drink my coffee on the street.
and of course, you went to Jordan before you were in Saudi, weren't you?
Correct.
And I must admit, I rarely know anything about these countries other than the typical sort of, if you ask me to say what's in what country, if I think of Jordan, I think of Petra, archaeological sites,
Yeah.
maybe camels, and that's about it.
Yeah.
What would you tell me about Jordan? Cardamom coffee on the street?
Cardamom coffee on the street. It's a mix between Christians and Muslims, which was quite interesting. It is this confusing mix between very hospitable people, veterans that constantly ask you for sex, kind of frightening children because a lot of them are shepherds and they wait with their stick and they slap it on their hand and then they see you coming on your bike and they run on the street and they kind of block the street a little bit.
Oh, that's creepy.
Yeah, and I heard that some people had some negative experience. I didn't have too bad of experiences, but the kids were a little bit rude. Like I would get the singer or they would tell me to F off or something like this.
Wow, that's something I totally would not have expected.
Yeah, it is very confusing because most of the adults are really friendly.
I wonder what's going on there. Again, something that I totally would not have expected beforehand. It was in Saudi Arabia that your rear tyre, your faithful, I'm thinking it was a Schwaber tyre, was
Correct.
starting to give up the ghost, wasn't it?
Yes.
You still had a long way to go, but that tyre was giving you every last bit that it had, and it was starting to split at the, well, not on the seams, it was starting to split at the tread, wasn't it?
Yeah, my faithful tire wanted to give in. I was on my way from Taif to Riyadh, which was about I don't know, 9-day journey with not much in between. Again, battling really hot temperatures and huge days of cycling and early mornings. But I had ridden through the Negev desert and the Jordanian desert and rode a lot of off-road there. So my tires had a lot of cuts. And yeah, unfortunately, that once again led to innumerable punctures. And I was stuck on the side of the road in the middle of the day in heat, trying to repair those punctures and get my back tire working. And it was once again a struggle. Yeah. At a certain stage, I just had like a slow leak, I would call it. So I think every couple of hours, I was just like inflating my tire and I tried to find the problem, but it was incredible difficult. I tried everything. I had a second inner tube in the tire. I put like some people say you have to fold up a dollar note.
I've done that before, or a muesli bar wrapper if you're in Australia or something like that.
Exactly. I tried everything to support that tire to make it to my destination. And yeah, in the end, I made it to Dubai where new tires were waiting for me.
Because didn't you get to like some incredible, I don't even know if it was a bike store, but there was someone there that just went over and above to try and sort your tire out?
That's correct. It was actually, so I did go to a bike store before, somewhere in a small town I cannot remember the name of. And there they repaired the problem, they said. Anyway, a day later, my tire was leaking air again. And finally, I came to this petrol station, and it had like one of these garages, where people repair cars. And it was Pakistani people working there. And they asked me if I needed any help. And eventually I thought, maybe these guys can help me. Maybe they can tell me what's wrong with the tire or have any solution for it. And yeah, I remember there was this one guy, and he felt so grumpy about me even asking. So I was just like, okay, I don't need the help of you. So I just started to take the tire off myself and try to find the solution myself. But eventually he just grabbed my tire without ever lifting his gaze and looking at me. He did never look at me. So I wasn't sure if that was due to respect.
Quite possibly, I guess.
Exactly. Which I thought it was in the end. At first, it came across as he was grumpy at me. But when I saw him working like this at my tire with so much passion and really trying to find the problems here, and we did find it in the end. And even after he found the problem, he then tested the tire with soap to see if any air is coming out anywhere. So he went above and beyond to really make sure that the puncture is finally gone. And that was the moment when I thought, oh, I think he's not lifting his gaze due to respect.
And then you did obviously make it all the way to the UAE, where I think, if my memory serves me correctly, Madeline, you sort of had like a mini break, a mini reset, didn't you?
I did have a mini break, which was mainly due to waiting for my Pakistani visa. That took its time. And also, I was meant to fly to Pakistan, but then when my visa was finally approved, the flight prices went up due to a Muslim holiday. I didn't quite want to spend $800 to fly to Pakistan if it costs on other days maybe $200.
Can I ask, when you talk about the Pakistani visa, what was that process like to go through? You know how you said with Iran you applied and you were rejected. Was the Pakistani visa a hard visa to apply for?
So Pakistan was more straightforward, but they also took their time a little bit. So eventually I just sent them an email and just vouched about how much I would love to visit their country and explore the culture. And I tell you what, I've got no idea if this email has anything to do with it. However, the next day my visa was approved.
Couldn't hurt, right?
Exactly.
You must have been happy when the visa came through. And okay, you had some extra time maybe than you had planned in the UAE, but then you left and you arrived in Pakistan. If I remember correctly, your initial reactions there was almost ones of like culture shock too, wasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I just had spent the last 3 weeks in Dubai, which is a little bit of a capitalistic playground for adults, I would call it. But also, it gives you all the luxuries of the Western world, right?
Definitely.
So I just spent the time relaxing and, also enjoying a drink, which was obviously not possible in countries like Saudi Arabia. So just being like a normal Western girl, wearing a bikini. Yeah, then I came into Pakistan, which was, of course, very, very different. I stayed right in the center of Karachi, which was a very bustling and very local place of the city. It was very authentic. It was the old part of the town. And I guess where like the working or lower class were staying. And yeah, one thing that you realize very early on when you come to a place like Karachi is the massive gap between the rich and the poor people there. I think I have never seen that many people sleeping on the street as I have in Karachi, but I've also seen a lot of mansions in suburbs that looked like it could have been here in Sydney in Australia.
The full end of the spectrum of wealth and poverty.
Yeah.
Right next to each other.
Yeah, it was hard to understand how, like, a lot of people were fighting for their survival, for their daily bread, and some people lived in this incredible luxury. It was hard to believe, and I think they even have the saying in Karachi, it is the other side of the bridge. the poorer people live on this side of the bridge, and then there's the other side of the bridge.
It's almost like the English saying the wrong side of the tracks, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
You did spend time, though, on the other side of the bridge and in, I guess, the slum area as well. Madeline, you come across as someone who's pretty empathetic, who you're not a materialistic person yourself. You're a champion of secondhand, from your beautiful bike to your clothes that you wear. And even when the clothes that you wear are what other people would say have reached their end of life, you somehow find a way for them to just extend and rebirth, right? What was it like for someone like you then, who's already got that understanding of, not needing so much possessions, to be surrounded by people who really literally don't have much at all, and to see that poverty on that scale?
Well, it was incredibly interesting because I think we Western people, we can sometimes think, oh, we don't have much, we are not rich. But when you come to these places, you actually realize how rich you really are in life. Yeah, just seeing these people fighting for their daily bread, and with something that's called load shading, where they only have a certain amount of electricity during the day, a whole family sharing one room. There is no rubbish collection system, so there's a lot of rubbish on the street, and it is heartbreaking, really, really heartbreaking.
And when you say lots of rubbish on the street, we're not just talking about, 100 bottles or empty plastic bottles. Like, sometimes you can't see the street for the rubbish.
Correct, correct. I was quite shocked. And then, of course, this attracts a lot of flies. So I have visited markets in those so-called slums, and they would sell fruit, and the fruit was covered in flies. So of course it was also impossible to sell any of their products, so they couldn't make any money.
Things like that I would never even think of until it's actually spoken out to me, to see it with your own eyes. And as you say, the other side of the bridge is living totally differently. Can I ask a question? I've interviewed many people who've travelled to countries that certainly are not wealthy, and the people living there are, some are subsistence farmers, some don't have much at all. And there's sort of like a solidarity within the community, and that community seems like they're happy still. And that all often strikes a lot of travellers, that sort of birthplace privilege strikes them there and then. Here are people who have nothing to be happy about, yet they are. What about in a place like Karachi then? Did you see that side of it, or did you just see the struggle?
I mean, in the cities, you can definitely see a lot of struggle, because it's so dense and so many people are living there, and lots of people seem to struggle. Yet these people are the most hospitable, and they would share literally everything with you, even though they have nothing. And yeah, most of the time, they're still content and happy, I think, as long as they're healthy and have enough to eat.
Which, again, it takes you back to the basic needs.
Exactly. Yeah, to be honest, one thing that happened to me on my journey is also to understand what it really means to have a German passport.
I have an Australian passport, which is sort of up there as well.
Exactly.
Like, it's one of the most strongest passports you could have from a traveller's perspective, right?
The funny thing is, I actually never thought about what it means if you don't have a strong passport. It just means that you can't go to places in the world. And it sounds very naive, I have to admit, but it didn't come to me.
I interview people and we talk about visas and border crossings all the time, but it was only when I recently interviewed beautiful Moroccan Miriam Belkahel, who's currently on a monumental journey through Africa. Miriam, you're a superstar. By the time this episode comes out, you'll be almost 2 years on the road, 650 days probably, right?
Wow.
And it was only in interviewing Miriam that I realised, she wants to do this journey all the way to Tanzania, and she may not be able to because her passport will not let her go to certain countries.
Exactly.
That was my blind spot. Never even considered it.
Same. And that's why I was like, wow, this is what it means that I have a German passport. I was exactly the same. I didn't understand that certain countries cannot go to other countries for this reason.
And then there's the other side of it as well, where it's also just the ability to afford to have a passport in the first place.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, even if your passport's weak, can you even afford to have one?
Yeah. So many hurdles you have to overcome. And we just think, yeah, you get a passport and you go and travel. It's like, of course, money is always a thing, but you can travel a cheap way, like we figured out with bike touring, for example.
And if I was to talk about that, actually, like, what do you think your daily budget on average would have been? I don't know if you've actually worked it out.
I mean, as we might have realized that I'm not a person like this, I have never worked it out.
Of course. Sorry.
That's all good. But my daily budget is literally as little as possible. And as long as I stick to that rule, I will get through it. I think even in my personal life here in Australia, I'm a very frugal person. Like you said, I'm very much into sustainability and secondhand. I don't see the purpose of buying new things. I don't like to spend money on clothes or anything. And like you said, in Karachi, I actually went and I got my brown velvet pants. People were probably so sick of seeing on me, and I got them taken in.
Yeah, and new buttons on your shirt and stuff like that as well.
Correct. I did. And you know what? I still have that shirt here behind me.
I think I can see it hanging up. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That shirt. What that shirt has been through.
Correct.
Every drop of sweat.
Yeah. Even more so the velvet pants, because the shirt was actually a present in Turkey. However, the pants literally left with me from Sydney.
No, you can never get rid of those.
No. And they're already too big again. So the fabric gave in again. I think I need to take them in again.
Either that or maybe you turn the velvet into like a pillow cushion or something.
True, or a stuffed toy.
Oh, if you do, you have to let me know.
Yes.
Moving away from the slums of Karachi, my gosh, this feels like another extreme, because after Pakistan, you went to India, and your journey there, India was a place that you had been to before, but not on a bike.
Correct.
It would have been interesting to know what your experience as a traveler on a bicycle was like in India.
Yeah, so I, of course, crossed the border from Pakistan to India. And having just lived and cycled through Pakistan for, I think, about 5 weeks, I honestly felt this big relief arriving in India, because I finally didn't get as much attention anymore. I remember when I arrived in Amritsar, I sat down on the square and I got myself some ice cream, and I sat down on a park bench and I could eat my ice cream without being surrounded by 50 men. And that was such a relief for me. I just felt like I finally had more freedom again. I finally got less attention. It can just be so exhausting, so tiring when you are constantly getting that much attention or are always surrounded by so many people.
Mm.
I mean, for someone like me, I really, really kind of also value my private space and some quiet time, to recharge my batteries.
Yeah. And actually, was it in Amritsar where the Sikh temple you visited was? Is it the Golden?
Correct.
The Golden Temple. That would have been an amazing, incredible sight to see as well.
It was an amazing sight to see. Yeah, it was my first stop in India after arriving from Pakistan. And like I said, I needed a good rest when I arrived in India after cycling through the heat of Pakistan. I've kind of got sick from food and water. And I was also dealing with the police escort in Pakistan. So when I arrived at the Golden Temple in Amritsar, I decided to stay there for a few days. And it was quite interesting because when the man of the temple showed me where I would sleep, so I guess they have like this big room where foreigners can sleep, I just looked around and I saw a lot of beds. and I realized that other men would sleep there. And for me, I had just spent 9 months in Muslim countries. So the thought of sharing a room with foreign men I don't know seemed very strange and almost scary to me. However, we kind of do this maybe all the time in Western cultures, right? In hostels, for example. Yeah, you can book a mixed dorm. I remember doing that in Turkey and I remember doing that in Croatia. But it was interesting because after having spent 9 months in Muslim countries where not even a man could sit next to me on the bus, I felt that was quite intimidating. And then it was interesting because I think even though he didn't speak English really well, he understood. And when I came back, he showed me a different room where there were just two beds and I had the room to myself. And then I spent the next few days just in the Golden Temple, blending in with the locals. They loved me wearing the Pakistani dresses and the dupatta, they call it, the kind of headscarf they're throwing around themselves. So the locals were a big fan of me being dressed like that. And I just like enjoyed, yeah, blending in with everybody, being part of this group. You know, you go there and you sit in rows and they serve you food and everybody eats their food with their hands and then you stand up and you leave. And yeah, so that was quite interesting.
Wow. Just an experience that you don't know that you're going to have until you're there. We've talked about ones from all ends of the spectrum, like emotions of great heights to emotions of really low lows as well. I wouldn't mind taking you to a quote on that I found as well. And it was that bicycle touring isn't just picturesque campsites and sunsets. Bicycle touring often feels like a roller coaster. One day, your mind and body feel strong. The next day, you feel lonely. Sometimes things go wrong. I experienced the highest highs and lowest lows on my journey. We've talked about a few of those there. I want to take you to a highest high. And well, maybe it wasn't the highest high, but in me, my perspective of it was, and that was after you'd left Amritsar and the temple there, and you went up a huge mountain pass in India, and you wild camped again. And I think putting it into context to what you'd been to, and I know you'd wild camped in Saudi, and you know you were talking about that PTSD type trauma that you'd had of being on your own. But the reason I want to take you to this mountain pass is I feel the inner strength of feeling like you were riding up a constant incline, which I felt perhaps was a bit foreign after the type of areas you were cycling through. But you'd also arrived there in the dark from memory. So we're sort of unaware of actually the scenery you were going to be finding yourself in the morning. And so you're there, then you're wild camping. I want to know two things. The first is, did your tent at that stage feel like your own personal type of home, your safe place, your sanctuary at night? And then the second thing is, when you opened the fly on your tent in the morning and saw the sunshine, what was the thing that you remember the most?
Yeah, it was definitely a very interesting day. I can see it from your perspective, how it was definitely very scenic and mesmerizing. I remember how it was for me, and unfortunately, it wasn't quite as good. Of course, my eyes could see this pristine nature. However, I was already fighting with my sickness I had contained from a mosquito. So, leading up to riding this mountain pass, just before I rode that, so maybe a week before that, I was actually unable to walk. After I had left Amritsar behind, I made my way to Jammu. And while I was on my way to Jammu, I remember I cycled 100 kilometers that day and I suddenly got pains and aches everywhere. Once my ankle hurt, then my knee hurt, then I just felt super exhausted. And I had to take breaks, I think, every 20 kilometers. And it was a real struggle to make it to my host in Jammu. And when I finally had arrived, I thought, I have to lie down. And that's not like me. They actually wanted to go to a lake with me and explore it, my hosts. But I thought, no, I have to lie down. And from then on, I got high fever. And a few hours later, my joints were aching that much that I wasn't able to stand up or walk. So I remember the food was served, the dinner was served on the third floor, and I had to hold myself on the walls and pull myself up the stair and take it step by step. And just hours before that, I had cycled 100 kilometers. So I kind of knew something was completely wrong. My host and me went on and we did a malaria test, but that was negative. And then I was so confused. I was certain it would be positive. And my host back then was a trauma surgeon, and he just went on and said, "Oh, you just run down. You just run down." I myself knew I wasn't just run down because I had already all this journey behind me. And yes, I cycled a lot, but you don't do that in a day. You do this over time, gradually. Anyway, I took a break for a week and I took some vitamins, and then I carried on cycling. And the next thing I cycled was the foothills of the Himalayas. Yeah, so Sojila Pass.
Do you ever wonder how? Like, do you ever go, how on earth, Madeline, did you do this?
I mean, to be honest, I do very vividly remember what a struggle it was, because the whole distance I think I had to cycle was only 25 kilometers, but it took me countless of hours, and I have so many breaks every whatever kilometer, if even, and I thought to myself, something is wrong. Something is just wrong. I just wasn't able to push the pedals anymore. I just didn't have any more strength. And so when I finally made it to the other side, this is kind of where you see the photo taken. I was exhausted. I was cold. I was doubting myself. And no doubt, Zojila Pass was absolutely stunning and mesmerizing. And I wish I would have been in better physical condition to enjoy this pass more. It felt a bit like torture, to be honest. And then I finally found this campsite, actually with the help of some locals. And in the evening, I was blogging in my tent or writing my journal. And then I was about to go to sleep, much, much later than usual. It was 11 p.m. Usually I would go to bed at 8 or 9, or even earlier. And I remember that I opened my tent and there was a guy standing in front of the tent. And I thought to myself, okay, just be calm. Because this was, again, one of the occasions where some locals actually knew where my tent was. And that, of course, made me feel unsettled. But, sometimes you just have to trust the locals because you don't have a choice. And I did have mainly a positive feeling. And then I inspected the person more, and I thought, I'm sure he's one of the locals I had spoken to just before. And when I looked at him closer and he could barely speak any English, I realized that it was the one guy who had asked me if I'm married. And just the sort of question he asked me, I wasn't very happy to be alone with him. But as he came closer to me with his torch, he gave me a bag and said, dinner. And on one hand, I was really irritated because I was like, is he just pretending, wanting to bring me dinner? It was 11 p.m. I didn't really need dinner anymore at that stage. I didn't have any dinner, so I ate it. And then he offered me a cigarette. And I tried to make him understand that I have to go to sleep. He tried to look into my tent, and I tried to kind of hide what's in it because I thought maybe if it wasn't one of the locals, he can think that another person is in there. Anyway, in the end, I was relieved and definitely let out a sigh when he went back to the shops, which was actually about 2 kilometers far. So he walked through the night.
Yeah, that's a bizarre situation. And I guess paired up with your previous experience in Tel Aviv, you don't know what to make of that now, do you? Like,
Correct.
I guess that's the sad thing, isn't it? And I think it's a blind spot that many people don't realize is there. Over and above, I've interviewed strong women who take these journeys just like you have. It's wrong to say that all of the journeys taken by all of my guests have been without any incident. And I think the sad thing is the idea that we can do this, but sometimes it definitely means lots of extra precautions that perhaps if we weren't women, we wouldn't necessarily need to be thinking about as intently.
Yeah, totally. I envy some of the guys who just stop anywhere, put their tent next to the highway and go to sleep.
Mm.
I mean, especially after what happened to me, I can't even go to sleep if I would camp like this.
I definitely couldn't, and I haven't had what happened to you happen, so
Yeah.
I struggle to go to sleep wild camping full stop, so I haven't crossed that bridge yet.
I luckily fought myself back, like I said, with the vastness of Saudi Arabia, and then the Himalayas felt not as populated, so it was possible to find some secluded campsites. And you definitely have to use your intuition. But I remember also Marco, we mentioned before, bike tour from Italy. He just literally put his tent anywhere in India and he would wake up to 15 people surrounding his tent. And I'm just thinking, wow, I don't think I could do that because my night might end differently.
Or maybe it would end fine, but you wouldn't sleep because you're worried it's going to end differently. I think that's the other thing as well, right?
Oh, totally. I had that situation in Saudi Arabia when I actually was for once close to a town and I just had to put my tent somewhere close to people. And yes, that ended up with me not sleeping, even though in general I felt safe in Saudi Arabia. And of course, there are good people in any country. It doesn't have to do really with the country if anything happens or not. But I was up all night. I could not close my eyes.
It didn't stop you. Has it come close to stopping you? Or is it more that now, like you said, you can't pitch a tent in a highway, you can't pitch a tent where you're visible. You're trying to be as invisible as possible, make sure people don't see you. I think you talked before we press record how you even went to the stage of putting empty beer cans in front of your tent so people just assume it's a guy's in there and not to bother you.
Yeah, just a dude.
So there's strategies so that you can keep doing it. But there's going to be women listening to this who are a bit concerned. What would your advice be for them if they want to do something? You're not coming across as someone saying, don't do it, it's not safe.
No.
There's blissful ignorance and then there's also going into it with forewarned precaution as well.
Well, I highly recommend definitely doing it. You have to do it. And I think until what happened to me, some of it was definitely blissful ignorance, but not entirely. I was always taking precautions, but back then my spirits were like more free. These days, my mind is a bit more crowded with what could happen. Well, back then I was just filled with positive thoughts. And of course, something could have happened, but I think after you experienced it once, it is harder to move on from it. I mean, what I would recommend is to take the precaution to make sure that nobody can see where you are pitching your tent. So your tent should be kind of hidden, either if it's in woods. If you're in the desert, it could be behind a dune. Literally find anything where you could separate your tent from the street or having any view of it. And then, yeah, set up your tent only when it's dark and make sure that nobody can see a woman going into the tent. Like I said, I try to make it look from the outside like a guy is sleeping in the tent because I guess most people would not assume that a woman would travel solo on a bike. like you mentioned, I would put the empty beer can I just had right in front of the tent. My bike is blue. I thought maybe that helps. Stereotyping. And yeah, I wouldn't tell anybody where I would camp. Yeah, just these little precautions. Of course, you can be lucky and you can be unlucky. And always listen to your intuition. If you don't feel safe, move on. No matter if you have to cycle through the dark, just move on.
Your instincts have been bang on for your whole trip. Listening to your instincts has served you well.
Yeah, exactly.
Madeline, that mosquito-borne virus that wreaked havoc on your body, it did cause a pause in your journey. You flew back to Germany, got proper treatment, and then you restarted your journey in Thailand, if I'm correct?
Yes, correct. Yeah, so after I had cycled Sojilea Pass, I did another 2 mountain passes in the Himalayas of India.
Wow, incredible.
Yeah,
Especially knowing that you were sick.
yeah, yeah. I mean, at that stage, I didn't know what I have, but yeah, I was definitely battling it, and I was struggling a lot. Not even only with immense joint pain, having no strength, crazy tiredness and exhaustion, but also altitude sickness.
Oh, wow. Throw everything into the mix all at once.
Yeah, not to forget, a couple days later, I was hit by a motorbike.
Oh my gosh, I had forgotten this.
Yeah, so the universe had it in for me. It all hit at once, and at a certain stage, I was a bit mentally and physically battered. So I thought, okay, just give yourself a rest, get yourself out of the Himalayas. So I went to Himachal Pradesh and stayed with a couch surfing host for a week. And I thought, just do some yoga, recover physically and mentally. But the funny thing was, the longer I stayed at the place, the worse my joints got. Like, I couldn't open jars anymore. I was limping.
It was a really bad reactive arthritis taking over your body, really, wasn't it?
Yeah, correct, correct. Everything was incredibly painful and inflamed. But yeah, at a certain stage, I thought maybe it's the climate, you know? That's why I actually decided to get myself out of India and get myself to Thailand. So then in Thailand, I went to the hospital. They did find out that I had chikungunya, and they had never seen a case like mine, as I had such strong reactive arthritis.
Mm.
So they kind of assumed that I might have an underlying disease, like an autoimmune disease. We had to take it a little bit more serious. And yes, I then flew to Germany to investigate that. And in Germany, I actually did have a lovely break, as I was able to meet my 2 brothers.
Yeah, from your father that you'd never met before.
Correct.
It's sort of like the initial purpose of your journey sort of comes back in just out of out of nowhere.
Exactly. So yeah, while I was at an extreme low, I was able to take this with me at least and meet my 2 brothers. So that was really lovely. Yeah, reuniting with my grandma, which actually just had turned 90. So even though I was there for quite a challenging reason, I did enjoy this break in Germany and reconnecting with family and friends. And then I saw a specialist, and yeah, we found out that it is just reactive arthritis that's plaguing me. And I said to the doctor, so what does that mean for my trip? As she knew I'm on this kind of life-changing journey, she said to me, well, if you feel okay, you can go on. I mean, she had prescribed me cortisone tablets because the inflammation in my body was so high that, yeah, we had to reduce it. We actually had an ultrasound and we found inflammation in all of my joints, even in my thumb.
Do you still have that now?
Well, these days it's kind of healing, I would say. I did definitely, I was plagued by it for minimum half a year still after my journey, and it can hang around for about 2 years. So I'm very cautious with my diet and I'm making sure I'm exercising regularly. I try to not eat too much inflammatory foods and avoid everything that could, yeah, cause it to flare up again.
After Germany, then you come back to Thailand. You managed to somehow cycle through Southeast Asia. You went Thailand, through Cambodia, and did you finish in Vietnam because you had a flight to take to the Philippines for a friend's wedding?
Correct, correct. So just to quickly sum up what happened in Thailand, because I felt like I was not strong enough to go on. I was limping. I thought, this is it. I have to go home. And I was looking into flights to go home. And I sent my friend in Australia a message, I'm coming home. And she was just like, good, because she couldn't hear any more of my pains and aches.
I'm sick of you complaining. Get yourself back here.
Correct. But then after I said that, I had this sleepless night in Bangkok and I was reflecting on my journey. And I thought, how could this incredible life changing journey come to such an end? And while I was lying there, sleepless, I just thought to myself, you know what? You are the writer of your own story. And if you don't like this ending of this story, rewrite it. The only person who decides about your life is yourself. So in this moment, I changed my perspective because it always felt like, oh, I got hit by all of these misfortunes. I got hit by the motorbike. I got bitten by a mosquito, got chikungunya. I just got one hit after the other, and I felt like I had nothing left to give. But then I thought, change your perspective here. What if this is not trying to stop you, but to see how hard you really want this? So I didn't sleep a single minute that night. And the next morning, I got up and I put my bicycle back together and I started cycling. And like you said, I changed my plans. Originally, I had planned to cycle to Singapore, but because of the wedding, I didn't have enough time for that. So then I cycled from Bangkok to Cambodia and then to Ho Chi Minh. And I literally did that in 12 days nonstop.
Which isn't a small thing. And the thing that I think about, Madeline, is how much all of those experiences condensed over all the months that went beforehand through all the weather extremes. Because we've talked about oppressive heat in Saudi and through the Middle East. But in episode number 1, which listeners, I'll provide a link for so you can hear Madeline's first story. It'll be in the show notes. But we talked about how thankful you were that someone gave you an extra warm sleeping bag. Someone gave you bar mitts to put your hands in because you were cycling through ridiculously cold temperatures in Turkey in wintertime, which is my way of saying you built up so much mental and physical resilience. You wanted it enough to keep going. And somehow you do these incredible things. You get to the wedding in the Philippines. I can't imagine what it's like then to know that you're starting the final leg of your journey. Before the flight in Australia, you wrote, as I'm sitting at the gate waiting for another flight, I'm reflecting on the wonderful journey that is slowly coming to an end. Scrolling through the photos on my phone, it's difficult to fathom the sheer amount of new experiences I encountered every day. I'm immensely grateful to have found the courage and belief in myself to go on this adventure, and now can see how this journey has shaped me. I certainly had the best teacher, travel. You wrote that before coming back to Australia, but you didn't even fly back to Australia straight to Sydney. You flew to Brisbane, am I right?
Correct.
And then you cycled to Sydney. Now, I want to know 2 things. Was it because you wanted to cycle in Australia for a few days, or was it because the cheapest flight was Brisbane? Or was it both?
So the decision was that I wanted to arrive on my bicycle at my doorstep. And the story gets a little bit more bizarre when you hear what actually happened. Because in the Philippines, the airline did not allow me to board my flight with my bicycle in the box because they said the box was too big. Meanwhile, They didn't have any dimensions actually announced. However, fast forward, I was stuck in the Philippines with my flight gone.
No.
Actually, this is also the best example for a stranger helping you. Because I was stuck in the Philippines. My flight to Australia was gone, and you know how expensive it is to fly to Australia from anywhere. And I had to get there. And if I book a new flight, it is about what, $2,000? So I was stranded in Philippines, not knowing what to do. And I talked openly on Instagram how I am stuck in this situation and that I'm unsure what to do. And a fellow bike tourer saw my post that I am stuck in the Philippines, and he asked me where I have to get to. And I said to him, well, I'm hoping to go to Brisbane. And he said to me, oh, he always has a lot of miles for flying he can never use because the flights in Europe are never available. So this stranger, a bike tourer himself, who was on his way to China, offered to book me a flight with his miles to Australia.
Wow.
Correct. He had never met me, didn't want anything in exchange. He just wanted to help a fellow bike tourer. And so it happened that there was no flight to Brisbane, but to Sydney. So he booked me a flight to Sydney. Another lovely stranger booked me a flight with his miles to Brisbane
Oh my gosh. Wow.
because Madeline Hoffmann is so stubborn. She still wanted to cycle from Brisbane to Sydney.
What a story.
In the end, I ended up in Brisbane somehow and was able to finish my journey on the bicycle on my way to Sydney.
Madeline, can I just say, quick shout out. Those two awesome, incredible strangers. I don't know if you listen to the show, but if you do, you're dead set legends. You're just awesome. I just love it. So much pay it forward there. I always, Madeline, ask guests of the show to tell me about one day of their trip. And normally, and I said this to you before we started, I normally let you choose the day and the country, but I want to be stubborn and actually choose it for you. And I actually want it to be the last day of your trip. I want it to be the day that you arrived back in Sydney. I don't know what happened on that day. I don't know if it was momentous or anything. I actually want to hear what the emotions of that day would have been like to realise that you, Madeline Hoffmann, rode your beautiful second-hand bike all the way around the world and came back again. Tell me all about that day.
That day, I remember I woke up at a beach. Was it maybe 90 kilometers from Sydney? And it was a really beautiful, pristine beach because I knew I wanted my last campsite to be very scenic, very secluded, very natural. And yeah, I had a slow morning drinking my cardamom coffee, going maybe skinny dipping. Can't remember if I was wearing clothes or not. And then, yeah, I made my way to Sydney. One thing that stood out to me, unfortunately, something negative, was the closer I got to Sydney, the more aggressive the drivers got. So I was a little bit sad to see that that's the place I'm living in because cycling is such a huge part of my life and this is how people react to you. But putting that aside, I had unfortunately run out of my medication for the reactive arthritis leading up to that last day. And then literally the pain caught up with me. So the last 30 kilometers to my home were a real struggle. So again, I had to be determined to get there. And yeah, when I saw the skyline for the first time, I guess I knew I made it. And then, yeah, just riding through the CBD and then to my front door. To be honest, it felt all quite surreal. I don't think you really grasp what this means. I think you're so overwhelmed by everything that you're just kind of functioning. I remember one of my friends was waiting for me and we were just chatting. I think I had a quick cry and then my cat Maestro walked past me And for a split second, I had completely forgot about him. So I started screaming and, I was chasing after him and just hugged him. And I remember, I think it was all a huge shock, to be honest, to be back and to return into my apartment that kind of had not changed, but I had changed completely. It felt very strange. It felt like the time had stopped here, like everything in Sydney still seemed the same, but I just wasn't, you know?
That you had changed markedly and you'd come back to your old life.
Yeah,
It's almost like you felt like your old clothes didn't fit you anymore.
correct, correct. This is I had changed internally so much. And then, I mean, you know that a few months later, I shaved my head. And I think, to be honest, that all had to do with kind of needing to reinvent myself. Because, like you said, your old clothes, which is literally the feeling I have, I look at my old clothes and it's not something I want to wear. And it was the same with my hair. I remember I looked in the mirror and I'm thinking, who's that person? So just even shaving my head was such a freeing experience. And I think I look in the mirror and I know who I am. And I have I have lots of post-its hanging all over my place.
You do. I've been wondering what's on them. And you know what I've been thinking, Madeline? For someone who doesn't plan, there's lots of stuff planned on those post-its.
But the funny thing is, it's mostly affirmations. I tell you one thing that you might have seen is a post-it that hangs on my door. And I tell you what it says on it. It says, a creature in the transition state, neither caterpillar nor butterfly. And that's exactly how I felt.
You're still molding yourself into what you're going to be.
Yeah, or like you're like transitioning, because now I had discovered my roots. I had met my father. I have gone on this life-changing journey. But what does that all mean? Now you're back in normal life. What has come out of it?
I have wondered this with so many long-distance bike travelers that I've interviewed, Madeline, who have spent so much time on the road that to come back to what was their normal day-to-day life is just so foreign to them. And many struggle with that. Many struggle with knowing what to do when they're back to their life. Some people do slip back in. I don't say slip back in lightly. Some people have time with their family, get back to their jobs and find a way to marry up who they are now with who they were then. But others definitely struggle deeply with it. Bicycles are definitely a big part of your life now. I know you've taken a few trips in Australia, some bike packing trips, and your job is working at like a secondhand bike. Would I call it? It's not a bike store. It's like a bike community type of, what do you call it?
I mean, yeah, it is kind of like a bicycle recycler, like a social enterprise, saving bikes from landfill, repairing them, reselling them, giving them away to communities in need. I mean, I recently actually started teaching bike maintenance, so that is giving me a lot. And I love to inspire people, especially here in Sydney, where people kind of are scared of cycling, to get on their bike, especially girls,
Yeah, and can I just say, if I was to think of words to describe you, Madeline, inspirational is definitely there. And I know if I say that to some people, they don't know how to feel about being told that. But trust me, as the host of this show that receives much feedback about episodes and guests, I've lost count of the times where people have reached out to me after listening to your episode and have told me that you've inspired them to take a journey. And you deserve to know that. And people are going to listen to this maybe for the first time, not knowing anything about you before. The best way for people to find out more about you and your adventures, would that be via your Instagram?
Yeah, definitely via my Instagram. So just I am Madeline Hoffmann, literally. I am in the stage of writing a book, fingers crossed.
Yay!
So hopefully we can all read about it very soon. Or
Madeline, I am going to be the first person to buy your book. I'll go above your family and do that. How does that sound? Because I am super excited. My only thing is you'll have to sign it for me.
Oh, I will sign it for you. Don't you worry, Bella.
Trust me, Madeline, I'll take you on a book tour. We'll talk about it in stores. Like, honestly, your book will inspire so many others. And listeners, I'll provide links to Madeline's Instagram in the meantime in the show notes as well. Madeline, I literally could talk to you for more hours. I do need to wrap the show up. I have 3 very quick questions to ask you. One of them I always think is an impossible question, but you're a guest of Seek Travel Ride and you get to choose a song to go on the Seek Travel Ride music playlist. Now, this playlist did not exist in episode 1 and does now, and you are there as a guest, and I want to know, what song am I putting you down for to listen to on that playlist? What song is the soundtrack to your adventure?
I mean, to be honest, there are a lot of songs. And if I would have a little bit of time to look into it, I would probably tell you the name of a Pakistani song I listen to.
Oh, well, if you want, how about you send me that and I will add it to the playlist for you?
Yeah, I can also tell you, I mean, a Western song.
Yeah. Well, you should have 2 songs theoretically because you've been interviewed twice. So the Pakistani song can be one. And what's the Western song you're going to choose?
Oh, now you put me. No, now I just thought of a third song. Now it's getting hard. To say the song, I can think of the artist and the name right now that came to my mind very often while I was spending endless hours on the bike was Wonderful Life, but the Katie Malua version.
I know the song, but I don't know if I know that version. Katie Malua.
Yeah, for me it was particular that version because the song is obviously well known, but that version, yeah, was the one that always came to me on this trip.
Okay, final 2 questions. I have changed these up. So you've never been asked these before.
Okay.
The first one is, you have a choice one day, Madeline Hoffmann. You can cycle your bike forever on a road with endless, never-ending corrugations. Or you can choose to cycle into a never-ending, relentless headwind. Which one are you going to choose?
Can I just say, sorry, here comes the non-native speaker. What's corrugations?
Oh, corrugations are like, when you've been on a dirt road and the car suspension has made it like, like it's just endlessly bumpy road, like an endless bone-jarring bumpy road. Not like one pothole or 2, it's like forever bumpy.
Yeah. Ooh, that's very, very, very difficult. Maybe I would still take the corrugations over the headwind.
So I'll put you down on corrugations.
Yes.
There we go. Okay, you are locked in. Final question, Madeline Hoffmann, and this is a brand new question, and this is a new question that I'm going to be asking all guests from now on, and that is, I want you to finish this sentence for me. The best thing about taking a bike adventure is?
The best thing about taking a bike adventure is meeting all the different people of this planet and realizing that there are good people everywhere.
I absolutely love it. And listeners, I hope that you love the insights from all the experiences that Madeline has shared with us today. Madeline Hoffmann, wow, what a journey. It has been an absolute pleasure to live through those experiences, to remind myself and most likely remind yourself of exactly what you've done. It is an incredible journey, one that started from Germany to Turkey, and at many times could have had you stopped in many different places and saying, this is me done. But something you said during our recording here was, you can change your perspective and change the way the story's going. It's your viewpoint that decides things. And that's so true in so many ways for what you've achieved. I want to take you back to a quote that you said, starting out a bike tour can be overwhelming and scary, not only financially, but also knowledge-wise too. Which gear do I need? How should I plan the route? Well, you don't need to have it all figured out. You don't need to have the best and most expensive gear. As a well-seasoned bike traveller once told me, the best thing about bike touring is all you need is a bike to feel free. And Madeline Hoffmann, that really sums things up for me. You've shown how a complete beginner can cycle all the way around the world. You are an inspiration. Thank you so, so much for sharing your stories and experiences here on the show for us at Seek Travel Ride.
You're welcome. Thank you so much, Bella, for having me.
Well, listeners, I hope you have stuck around for that incredibly engaging conversation I shared there with Madeline. For me, it was such a gift to be able to connect back with her and to hear how the rest of her journey played out. I'm sure if I was to have asked her when she had landed in Turkey in January, when we caught up almost 2 years ago now for that first episode recording, do you think you would cycle all the way back to Australia? I'm not 100% sure what her answer would have been. But I'm so glad that she kept going despite all the ever-increasing challenges that she had her way. And I can only imagine the resilience that she has built up now from taking on such an incredible adventure. And being part of the bike community is a huge part of Madeline's identity now and her life there in Sydney as well. I encourage you to check her out on Instagram and be inspired by her journeys past and what will most likely be continuing to occur in her future journeys as well. Thank you so much, Madeline. While I'm saying thank you, I just want to say a massive, quick, heartfelt thank you to you. Yes, you, the person who's listening to this episode right now, because if you've still stuck around, you are a true super fan. And you are one of the many, many people who have made Seek Travel Ride such a success. I certainly did not think when I first interviewed Madeline in episode 1 that I would potentially still be conducting a podcast that has 100 episodes. I've been taking a lot of time the last few weeks leading up to this episode to reflect on the amazing stories of my guests that I have been so privileged to share with you, and to take stock of all the emails, Instagram DMs, Facebook messages, and everything else in between that has come my way of people thanking me for the stories that I have shared with them. I know a community has sprung up around this podcast, and I cannot thank you enough for how deeply that has impacted me as well. I am looking forward to taking on the next 100 episodes, and I encourage you to stick around and let's see what journeys are going to be taken over that time. Thank you so, so much for being fans of the show and tuning in each week to Seek Travel Ride. Until the next episode, I'm Bella Malloy. Thanks for listening. And that's a wrap on today's adventure. Before you head off, here's a final shout out to Old Man Mountain for supporting the podcast. If you're dreaming of a new bike adventure or mapping out your next big tour, you want to make sure your gear can keep up with you every pedal stroke of the way. Old Man Mountain racks are built to handle any terrain you choose, from rough off-road trails to smooth highways, giving you reliable, stable carrying power that frees you up to focus on your adventure. Check out their full range at oldmanmountain.com and start gearing up for wherever your next journey takes you.